The crack of a pistol echoed through the dusty streets of Marfa, Texas, as Rebecca Mitchell stared out the window of her family's modest homestead, knowing that the sound marked the beginning of the end of her freedom. The year was 1875, and at 19 years of age, Rebecca was about to discover just how little her dreams meant to her father. "It's time, Rebecca." Her mother's voice quivered from the doorway. Martha Mitchell's eyes were rimmed red, her hands trembling as she clutched a faded blue dress. "Your father says you need to look presentable." Rebecca turned from the window, her honey-brown hair falling in waves past her shoulders. "Presentable for what, Mother? For being sold like cattle?" The bitterness in her voice couldn't mask the fear underneath. Her mother crossed the small bedroom, pressing the dress into Rebecca's reluctant hands. "It's not like that. Your father is just trying to secure your future. Times are hard, and I'm worth more as a bride than as a daughter," Rebecca finished. "I understand economics, Mother. What I don't understand is how my own family can do this to me." The Mitchell family had once been prosperous ranchers, but 3 years of drought followed by a devastating cattle disease had left them destitute. Rebecca's 3 younger siblings needed food, and the bank was threatening to take their land. Her father's solution had been as simple as it was heartbreaking: auction off his eldest daughter to the highest bidder. "The men coming today are respectable," her mother whispered, though her eyes wouldn't meet Rebecca's. "Mr. Patterson has a large ranch north of here, and Mr. Thornton owns half the businesses in El Paso." Rebecca clutched the dress so tightly her knuckles whitened. "They're old enough to be my father. They can provide for you," her mother insisted, finally looking up with tears streaming down her face. "Please, Rebecca, don't make this harder than it needs to be." An hour later, Rebecca stood in the parlor wearing the blue dress, her hair neatly pinned, feeling like a prize heifer at auction. 4 men sat across from her father at the dining table, glasses of whiskey before them, discussing her as if she weren't present. "She's healthy," her father, Gerald Mitchell, was saying. "Strong back, good hips for bearing children. Reads and writes better than most, though she's got a stubborn streak." The oldest of the men, Thornton, looked her up and down like he was appraising livestock. "Can she cook?" "Best biscuits this side of the Pecos," her father boasted, though Rebecca had burned every batch she'd attempted that month out of silent protest. $200, offered Patterson, a balding man with tobacco-stained teeth. 300, countered Thornton, never taking his eyes off Rebecca's figure. Her stomach turned. This couldn't be happening. Not in America, not in 1875. And yet here she stood, being bartered away by her own blood. $500. The new voice cut through the room like a knife. All heads turned to the man who had remained silent until now. He sat at the far end of the table, his hat pulled low over his eyes, but Rebecca could see he was younger than the others, perhaps in his late 20s. When he raised his head, she caught a glimpse of piercing blue eyes beneath the brim of his hat. 500, her father repeated, incredulity and greed warring in his expression. "That's mighty generous, Mr. Irving." Ethan Irving nodded once, his expression unreadable. "I think we both know that's more than fair." The other men grumbled, but none countered the offer. $500 was nearly a year's wages for most working men. "Sold," her father declared, reaching across to shake Irving's hand. "She's yours as of tomorrow morning. You can take her after the paperwork's signed with the judge." Rebecca felt the room spin. Tomorrow. By this time tomorrow, she would belong to a stranger. Her knees weakened, and she gripped the back of a chair to steady herself. "If it's all the same," Irving said, standing and placing his hat on his head, "I'd like a word with Miss Mitchell. Alone." Her father frowned. "Now see here, you've sold her to me, haven't you?" Irving's voice remained level, but there was steel beneath the words. I believe that entitles me to a private conversation with my betrothed. The word made Rebecca flinch. After a moment's hesitation, her father nodded. 10 minutes. The porch should be private enough. Rebecca followed the stranger outside, her heart hammering against her ribs. The evening air was cool against her flushed skin as they stepped onto the porch. For a long moment, neither spoke. She studied him more carefully, now tall and lean, with a face weathered by sun and wind, but not unkind. He wore simple clothes, a cotton shirt, worn denim pants, and boots that had seen better days, not the attire of a wealthy rancher. "Miss Mitchell," he finally said, removing his hat. His dark hair was slightly too long, curling at the nape of his neck. "I imagine you've got quite a few things you'd like to say to me right now." "Why?" The word burst from her before she could stop it. "Why would you pay such an amount for a woman you don't even know?" Something flashed in his eyes, compassion, perhaps, or understanding. "I have my reasons." He paused, then asked the question that would change everything. "What do you want, Miss Mitchell?" Rebecca blinked, taken aback. What do you want?" he repeated patiently. "If you weren't being sold to the highest bidder, what would you choose for yourself?" The question was so unexpected that Rebecca found herself speechless. No one had asked what she wanted in so long that she'd almost forgotten how to articulate it. "I want freedom," she finally whispered. "I want to decide my own fate. Her voice caught. "I want to go west to California." "I've heard women can make their own way there," he nodded, as if her answer didn't surprise him. "I'm heading to California myself. Got a small claim near Sacramento." Rebecca studied him suspiciously. "Are you suggesting—" "I'm suggesting a business arrangement," he interrupted. "I've paid for you fair and square, but I have no interest in forcing a woman into marriage. I need help with my claim, and you need transport west. We travel together as far as California, you help me get established, and then you're free to go your own way with enough money to start fresh." Rebecca narrowed her eyes. "Why would you do this?" A shadow crossed his face. "Let's just say I know what it's like to be treated as property." She wanted to press him further, but sensed he wouldn't elaborate. "How do I know I can trust you? That this isn't just a trick to get me to come willingly?" "You don't," he admitted. "But consider your alternatives." Rebecca glanced back at the house, where old men were dividing her worth in dollars. Then she looked at Ethan Irving with his steady gaze and unexpected question about what she wanted. "When do we leave?" she asked. "Dawn," he replied. "Pack light. The journey won't be easy." When Rebecca returned to the parlor, the men were finishing their business. Her father counted the money Ethan had given him, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "You've made a fine purchase, Mr. Irving," he said, as if speaking of a prized mare rather than his daughter. "She'll make you a good wife." "I'm sure we'll come to an understanding," Ethan replied neutrally. He nodded to Rebecca. "I'll return at dawn, Miss Mitchell. Be ready." That night, Rebecca packed her meager possessions: 2 dresses, undergarments, a hairbrush, a small book of poetry that had belonged to her grandmother, and a locket containing a snippet of her mother's hair. As she worked, her youngest sister Mary watched from the bed they shared. "Are you scared, Becky?" the 10-year-old whispered. Rebecca paused, considering how to answer. "Yes," she admitted finally, "but sometimes being scared is better than being trapped." Mary's eyes filled with tears. "Will I ever see you again?" Rebecca sat beside her sister, pulling her close. "I don't know, little one, but I'll write to you, I promise. And when you're older, maybe you can come find me in California." "California?" Mary's eyes widened. "Is that where Mr. Irving is taking you?" "Yes." Rebecca hesitated, then added, "But it's a secret. Can you keep it for me?" Mary nodded solemnly. "I won't tell Papa." Rebecca kissed her sister's forehead. "I have to go to sleep now. Morning will come too soon." But sleep eluded her. She lay awake, watching moonlight crawl across the ceiling, wondering if she was trading one form of captivity for another, or if Ethan Irving truly meant to give her freedom. The man was an enigma, paying a small fortune for her, only to offer her eventual liberty. What did he really want? And how far could she trust him? Dawn broke with a thin line of pink on the horizon. Rebecca dressed quickly in her sturdiest skirt and blouse, then braided her hair tightly. She tucked her small bundle of possessions into a pillowcase and crept downstairs. Her mother waited in the kitchen, eyes swollen from crying. "I've made you some biscuits for the journey," Martha said, pressing a cloth-wrapped package into Rebecca's hands. "Thank you, Mother." Rebecca hesitated, then embraced the older woman. Despite everything, she couldn't hate her mother, who was as much a victim of her father's authority as Rebecca herself. "He's here," Martha whispered, pulling away as the sound of hoofbeats approached outside. Rebecca stepped onto the porch to find Ethan Irving waiting, mounted on a sturdy chestnut gelding. A second horse, a dappled mare, stood saddled beside him. "You know how to ride?" he asked. Rebecca nodded. "I grew up on a ranch." "Good. We've got a lot of ground to cover." Her father emerged from the house, squinting in the early light. "Taking her already? The judge won't be available until noon to make it official." "I've got the bill of sale," Ethan replied coolly. "That's sufficient for now. We can handle the formalities in the next town." Gerald Mitchell frowned but didn't argue. He'd already spent part of the money on paying off debts. He couldn't risk Irving changing his mind. "Well then," he said, turning to Rebecca with an awkward pat on her shoulder. "Be a good wife. Do as you're told." Rebecca said nothing, mounting the mare with practiced ease despite her skirts. "Goodbye, Father," she said formally, refusing to show the turmoil inside her. Without another word, Ethan turned his horse west and Rebecca followed, not looking back at the home she'd known all her life. The rising sun cast long shadows before them as they rode out of Marfa. Two strangers bound by a bizarre transaction and an uncertain promise. They rode in silence for the first hour, putting distance between themselves and the town. The landscape of West Texas stretched around them, vast and unforgiving scrubby plains giving way to distant mesas. Rebecca found herself studying her companion's straight back, the confident way he handled his horse, the gun belted at his hip. "How far are we going today?" she finally asked, breaking the silence. "There's a creek about 15 miles ahead," Ethan replied without turning. "We'll rest the horses there, then push on to make camp near the foothills before nightfall." Rebecca adjusted her position in the saddle. "You seem to know this country well." "I've made this journey before." His tone didn't invite further questions, but Rebecca wasn't one to be easily silenced. "Mr. Irving, if we're to travel all the way to California together, we should at least know something about each other." He glanced back at her, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. "Fair enough. What would you like to know, Miss Mitchell? How did you have $500 to spend on acquiring me?" The question had been nagging at her since the previous day. His clothes were serviceable but not expensive, his saddle well worn. He didn't look like a man of means. Ethan was quiet for so long that Rebecca thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured. "I spent 5 years working a silver mine in Nevada," he said. "Saved every penny. That money was meant to buy equipment and supplies for my claim." Rebecca felt her face flush. "So I've taken your mining funds." "It was my choice," he said simply. "We'll manage." "But why? Why would you spend everything on freeing a stranger?" Again, that long pause. "Because 12 years ago someone did the same for me." Before Rebecca could ask what he meant, Ethan urged his horse into a trot, moving ahead on the trail and effectively ending the conversation. Rebecca frowned, intrigued despite herself. The man was clearly carrying secrets, and she wondered what could possibly connect his past to her present circumstances. By midday, they reached the creek Ethan had mentioned. While the horses drank, Rebecca splashed cool water on her face and neck, grateful for the respite from the sun. Ethan produced jerky and hardtack from his saddlebags, offering her a share. "It's not much," he apologized. "We'll get proper supplies in Fort Davis." Rebecca accepted the food, suddenly realizing how hungry she was. "How long until we reach California?" "If the weather holds and we don't run into trouble, about 6 weeks. 6 weeks of traveling alone with this man. The impropriety of it struck Rebecca anew. "People will talk," she murmured, more to herself than to him. Ethan looked up from adjusting his horse's saddle. "People always talk." "Does it matter? My reputation will be irrelevant in California," he finished. "No one there will know or care about how you arrived." Rebecca considered this. He was right, of course. She'd been so focused on escaping her immediate situation that she hadn't thought through what freedom might actually mean. A fresh start with no history following her. "What will we tell people along the way?" she asked practically. Ethan shrugged. "That we're brother and sister. Or cousins if you prefer. Not husband and wife." The question slipped out before she could stop it. Something flickered in his eyes. "That would be more believable, but it would also create expectations that I have no right to impose on you." Rebecca studied him, puzzled by his scruples after he had effectively purchased her. "You're a strange man, Mr. Irving." The ghost of a smile touched his lips again. "So I've been told, Miss Mitchell." They continued westward that afternoon, the terrain gradually becoming more rugged as they approached the foothills of the Davis Mountains. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, Ethan guided them to a sheltered spot near a stand of juniper trees, with a small spring bubbling nearby. "We'll camp here," he announced, dismounting with fluid grace. Rebecca slid from her saddle more stiffly, her muscles protesting after hours of riding. She'd grown up riding horses, but never for such a distance without rest. Ethan noticed her discomfort. "It gets easier," he offered. "By the time we reach New Mexico, you'll be toughened up." "I'm fine," she insisted, though she couldn't suppress a wince as she stretched her back. He didn't argue, simply turning to unsaddle the horses and set up camp with practiced efficiency. Rebecca watched him work, feeling awkward and useless. "What can I do to help?" she finally asked. Ethan glanced up from where he was gathering stones for a fire ring. "There's a coffee pot in my left saddlebag. If you want to fill it at the spring, we can have coffee with dinner." Grateful for the task, Rebecca retrieved the pot and filled it at the spring. By the time she returned, Ethan had a small fire burning and was slicing salt pork into a skillet. "You have a cup for me to use?" she asked. He nodded toward his saddlebag. "Tin cup in there, just one, I'm afraid." "We can share." Rebecca found the cup, trying to ignore the intimacy implied by sharing drinking vessels with a strange man. As the coffee boiled and the salt pork sizzled, the domestic nature of the scene struck her as surreal. 24 hours earlier, she had been facing the prospect of forced marriage to an elderly stranger. Now she was camping in the wilderness with a different stranger who had spent a fortune to buy her freedom. "Mr. Irving," she said abruptly, "I want you to know that I'm grateful. Whatever your reasons, you've saved me from a terrible fate." He looked up from the fire, his face half illuminated by the flames. "Don't thank me yet, Miss Mitchell. The journey ahead is dangerous, and I can't guarantee your safety every step of the way." "Still," she persisted, "you asked me what I wanted. No one's done that in a very long time." Something softened in his expression. "Everyone deserves that much." They ate in companionable silence as darkness fell completely, the vast Texas sky opening above them in a dazzling display of stars. After the meal, Ethan produced a bedroll from his pack and spread it near the fire. "This is for you," he said, gesturing to the bedroll. "I'll keep watch for the first part of the night." Rebecca glanced at the single blanket. "And where will you sleep?" "I've got my saddle and coat," he replied, moving to sit with his back against a juniper tree, rifle across his knees. "I'll be fine." She hesitated, then said, "We could share the bedroll. It seems large enough and the nights are cold out here." Ethan's expression remained impassive, but she noticed his grip tighten on the rifle. "That wouldn't be appropriate, Miss Mitchell." "You bought me," she reminded him, a hint of bitterness creeping into her voice. "By the standards of my father and those men, I'm already your property. What's appropriate hardly matters now." "It matters to me," he said firmly. "And you are not my property. That paper my money bought means nothing to me except as a way to get you safely away from there." Rebecca studied him in the firelight, trying to reconcile his words with the transaction she'd witnessed. "I don't understand you." "You don't need to," he replied simply. "Just know that while we travel together, you have nothing to fear from me." Something in his tone, the absolute certainty of it, finally convinced her. She nodded once, then moved to the bedroll, wrapping herself in the rough blanket without removing her clothes. Despite her exhaustion, sleep came slowly as she lay looking up at the star-filled sky, listening to the small sounds of the night and the steady breathing of the enigmatic man keeping watch nearby. The next week fell into a pattern as they traveled westward through rugged terrain. They rose at dawn, broke camp, and rode until the heat of midday forced them to rest. In the afternoons they pushed on until dusk, making camp wherever they could find water and shelter. They spoke little during these days, both focused on the physical demands of the journey. They passed through Fort Davis on the third day, where Ethan purchased additional supplies: flour, beans, coffee, ammunition, and to Rebecca's surprise a second blanket and tin cup. "You don't need to sleep cold," he explained gruffly when she noted the purchases. In the small trading post, Rebecca noticed how Ethan kept his distance from her in public, maintaining the fiction that they were cousins traveling to join family in California. The storekeeper's wife eyed them suspiciously nonetheless. "Young woman like you shouldn't be traveling without proper chaperone," the woman commented as she wrapped Rebecca's purchases. "My cousin is protection enough," Rebecca replied evenly, nodding toward Ethan, who was examining hunting knives across the store. The woman sniffed. "Mighty convenient relation. He's not wearing a ring and neither are you." Rebecca felt her cheeks flush but held the older woman's gaze. "My arrangements are my own concern, madam. Times like these, a woman needs to be careful about her reputation," the storekeeper's wife persisted. "Times like these, a woman needs to be careful about staying alive," Rebecca countered. "Reputation won't matter much if I'm dead from Apache raids or bandits, will it?" The woman's mouth tightened disapprovingly, but she said no more as she finished wrapping the goods. As Rebecca turned to go, however, the woman called after her softly. "The Apache aren't the danger out here, girl. It's the men who seem respectable that you need to watch." Rebecca glanced at Ethan, still absorbed in his examination of knives. "Some men are worthy of trust," she said, surprising herself with her own conviction. Outside the trading post, Ethan loaded their purchases onto the horses while Rebecca adjusted her bonnet against the harsh sun. "That woman didn't believe we're cousins," she informed him. Ethan shrugged. "Does it matter? It might. People talk, especially in small towns. Word could get back to my father," he paused, giving her a long look. "Are you worried he'll come after you?" Rebecca considered the question. "No," she decided finally. "He has his money. That's all he wanted from me." Something like anger flashed in Ethan's eyes, quickly suppressed. "Then let them talk. We'll be long gone before it matters." They left Fort Davis behind, heading northwest toward El Paso. The terrain grew increasingly challenging, with steep canyons and rocky passes that slowed their progress. On the fifth night, they made camp in a natural alcove formed by towering red rock formations. As Rebecca prepared their simple meal of beans and cornbread, she found herself watching Ethan more closely than usual. In the days they'd traveled together, she'd noticed things about him: the way he always positioned himself between her and potential danger, how he took the harder path when the trail narrowed, the fact that he always let her eat first despite his obvious hunger. Small courtesies that spoke of a man raised with respect for others. "You never mentioned what brought you to Marfa," she said as they ate by the fire. "It's not exactly on the route to California." Ethan took a slow sip of coffee before answering. "I heard there was a land auction. Thought I might find a cheap parcel to use as a way station." Rebecca frowned. "But instead you spent all your money on me. Plans change." He stared into the fire, his expression unreadable in the flickering light. "Mr. Irving," she said hesitantly, "earlier you mentioned that someone once did for you what you did for me. What did you mean by that?" For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, with a sigh, he set down his cup. "I was born a slave in Georgia," he said quietly. "My mother died when I was 10. My father was the plantation owner, though he never acknowledged me as his son." Rebecca's eyes widened. Ethan's complexion was sun-darkened, but she had never thought. "When I was 15, he continued, "I was sold to a man who ran a silver mine in Nevada. Brutal work. Many didn't survive a year." He rolled up his sleeve, revealing a series of thin white scars crisscrossing his forearm. "Punishment for not meeting quota," he explained dispassionately. Rebecca's stomach turned. "How did you escape?" "A man named Jacob Williams. He was a Quaker who'd come west to prospect. Instead, he found a mining operation using slave labor, years after the Civil War had ended." Ethan's voice softened with memory. "He couldn't free all of us, but he had enough money to buy one person's contract. He chose me because I was the youngest." "He bought your freedom," Rebecca whispered, understanding dawning. Ethan nodded. "Paid $300 to a man who had no right to own me in the first place. Then he took me to his claim, taught me everything he knew about mining, treated me like a son." A faint smile touched his lips. "When he died 3 years ago, he left me his claim and made me promise to use whatever I earned to help others." Rebecca sat in stunned silence, absorbing his story. Finally, she said, "So when you saw me being sold—" "I saw myself," he finished simply. "And I had the means to do something about it." The revelation transformed her understanding of him completely. This wasn't charity or some strange whim. It was a debt being paid forward, a promise kept to a man who had given him his freedom. "Thank you for telling me," she said softly. Ethan nodded once, then stood abruptly. "We should get some sleep. Long day tomorrow." As he moved away to check on the horses, Rebecca watched him, seeing not just the strong, capable guide who had led her safely through the wilderness, but a man who understood captivity in ways she could barely comprehend. Her respect for him deepened, along with something else she wasn't ready to name. That night, wrapped in her blanket beside the dying fire, Rebecca dreamed of chains falling away and open roads stretching endlessly westward. And somewhere in those dreams, Ethan Irving walked beside her, his hand occasionally brushing against hers. The next morning brought unexpected trouble. As they prepared to break camp, Ethan suddenly tensed, his head cocked toward the east. "Riders coming," he said tersely. "At least 3, moving fast." Rebecca felt a surge of alarm. "Bandits, maybe." He handed her the reins to her horse. "Mount up, quickly." She obeyed without question, gathering her skirts and swinging into the saddle as Ethan kicked dirt over their fire. He mounted in one fluid motion, then led them deeper into the rocky terrain, away from their planned route. "Where are we going?" Rebecca asked, keeping her voice low as they picked their way through a narrow canyon. "There's a box canyon up ahead with only one entrance," Ethan explained. "If they're just passing through, we'll wait them out, if they're tracking us specifically." He patted the rifle in his saddle holster meaningfully. The implication chilled her. Who would be tracking us? Could be anyone. Marauders looking for easy targets. Might be someone who saw us in Fort Davis and decided we looked worth robbing. They reached the box canyon. Ethan had mentioned a natural fortress with high walls on 3 sides and only a narrow opening for access. Once inside, Ethan positioned them behind a large boulder near the entrance, where they could observe without being easily seen. Minutes ticked by in tense silence. Then, the sound of hoofbeats grew louder, accompanied by men's voices. Rebecca held her breath as 3 riders appeared at the canyon entrance. Even from a distance, she recognized one of them immediately. "That's Jenkins," she whispered to Ethan. "He works for my father." Ethan's expression darkened. "Seems your father might want his merchandise back after all." The men halted their horses at the canyon entrance, scanning the area. Jenkins, a burly man with a perpetual scowl, dismounted and examined the ground. "Tracks lead in here," he called to his companions. "Fresh, too." "What Mitchell say this fella looked like again?" asked one of the other men. "Tall, dark-haired. Traveling with the girl," Jenkins replied. "Said he'd pay us $50 each if we bring her back. Extra 20 if we teach the man a lesson for stealing his property." Rebecca felt sick. Her father hadn't been content with selling her once, he wanted to sell her again. The cruel economics of it made perfect sense. If he could reclaim her and auction her off a second time, he'd double his profit. Beside her, Ethan quietly eased his rifle from its scabbard. "When I tell you to," he whispered, "I want you to take your horse and ride west through that gap in the rocks." He nodded toward a barely visible crevice in the canyon wall behind them. "It opens onto a trail that follows a dry creek bed. Follow it until you reach a stand of cottonwoods, then wait for me." "I'm not leaving you to face them alone," Rebecca protested. "This isn't a debate," Ethan said firmly. "I promised you freedom, and I intend to keep that promise." Before she could argue further, Jenkins called out, "We know you're in here, Irving. Send out the girl and we'll let you live." Ethan's jaw tightened. "They know my name." "Someone in Fort Davis must have recognized you," Rebecca reasoned, "or they described you to my father." Jenkins and his companions were advancing into the canyon now, spreading out to cover more ground. They hadn't spotted Ethan and Rebecca behind the boulder yet, but it was only a matter of time. "Go," Ethan urged her, cocking his rifle. "Now, while they're still bunched together." "No," Rebecca said stubbornly, "I won't leave you." Exasperation flashed across his face. This isn't the time for his words were cut off by a gunshot that ricocheted off the boulder above their heads. Jenkins had spotted them. "There they are," the man shouted. "Get the girl." What happened next unfolded with terrifying speed. Ethan rose from behind the boulder, rifle raised, and fired a warning shot that kicked up dust at Jenkins's feet. "That's close enough," Ethan called. "The woman isn't going anywhere with you," Jenkins sneered. "Mitchell says different. He's got a bill of sale that says she belongs to him." "I've got a bill of sale too," Ethan countered. "And possession is 9/10 of the law out here." "3 against 1, mister," called one of Jenkins's companions, a wiry man with a pockmarked face. "You really want to die over some girl?" Rebecca felt a surge of indignation at being reduced to some girl, but before she could react, Ethan spoke again. "I'm giving you one chance to ride away," he said, his voice deadly calm. "Take it," Jenkins laughed. "You've got guts, I'll give you that." He raised his pistol. but I've got $50 waiting for me when I bring back Mitchell's daughter." The standoff lasted only seconds, but to Rebecca, it seemed an eternity. Then Jenkins fired, his bullet grazing Ethan's shoulder. Ethan returned fire with deadly accuracy, hitting Jenkins in the chest. The man crumpled to the ground with a surprised expression. The other two men opened fire simultaneously. Ethan pushed Rebecca down behind the boulder, shielding her with his body as bullets whizzed overhead. She felt him wince as one found its mark, but he didn't cry out. Instead, he rose again and fired twice in rapid succession. One shot went wide, but the other caught the pockmarked man in the leg, sending him tumbling from his horse. The third man, seeing his companions down, turned his horse and galloped from the canyon. Ethan aimed but didn't fire. "He's out of range," he muttered, lowering his rifle. Only then did Rebecca notice the growing bloodstain on Ethan's left side. "You're hit," he glanced down almost disinterestedly. "Just a graze. We need to move before that third man brings back reinforcements." Rebecca scrambled to her feet. "Let me see it first." "No time," he insisted, already moving toward their horses. "We need to put miles between us and here before nightfall." Despite his protests, Rebecca could see that the wound was more than a graze. The bullet had torn through his side, leaving a deep furrow that bled freely. But she recognized the steel in his expression. He wouldn't stop until they were safe. They mounted quickly and rode west through the gap Ethan had indicated earlier. The trail was treacherous, barely wide enough for their horses, with a steep drop on one side, but Ethan navigated it with the confidence of someone who had traveled this way before. By late afternoon, Ethan's face had gone pale beneath his tan, and he swayed slightly in the saddle. Rebecca rode up alongside him. "We need to stop," she said firmly. "You're losing too much blood." He shook his head stubbornly. "Not yet. There's a place up ahead, abandoned line shack. Used to belong to a cattle outfit that went bust. We'll be safer there." An hour later, they reached the line shack, a crude but solid structure built of logs and adobe, nestled against a hillside. Once inside, Rebecca insisted on examining Ethan's wound, despite his continued protests. "Sit down before you fall down," she ordered, pointing to a rickety chair. To her surprise, he obeyed, though his mouth quirked in amusement at her tone. "Yes, madam." Rebecca helped him remove his blood-stained shirt, trying to maintain a clinical detachment as she examined his torso. The bullet had carved a deep channel along his ribs, but thankfully hadn't penetrated his chest cavity. Still, it was serious enough to need proper attention. "I need to clean and bandage this," she said. "Do you have any whiskey in your supplies?" He nodded toward his saddlebag. "Flask in the side pocket." Rebecca found the flask and a relatively clean shirt that she tore into strips for bandages. Returning to Ethan, she saw that he had closed his eyes, his breathing shallow. "This will hurt," she warned him, uncorking the flask. His eyes opened, showing a glimmer of his usual wry humor. "Not my first bullet wound, Miss Mitchell." Despite his bravado, he hissed through clenched teeth when she poured whiskey over the injury. Rebecca worked efficiently, cleaning the wound and binding it with the makeshift bandages. As she worked, she couldn't help noticing the other scars that marked his body, evidence of a hard life lived on his own terms. "You could have left me," she said quietly as she tied off the bandage. "You could have given me to Jenkins and saved yourself all this trouble." Ethan's blue eyes met hers. "That was never an option." "Why not? You don't owe me anything. You've already spent your mining fund on me." "I made you a promise," he said simply. "You wanted freedom. I intend to see that you get it." Rebecca sat back on her heels, studying him. "And what do you get out of this arrangement, Mr. Irving?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "The satisfaction of keeping my word, and perhaps some company on a long journey." There was something more in his expression, something he wasn't saying. But before Rebecca could pursue it, exhaustion overtook him and his eyes drifted closed again. "You should rest," she said, rising to her feet. "I'll keep watch." For once, he didn't argue, and soon his breathing deepened into sleep. Rebecca moved to the small window of the shack, rifle in hand, and prepared for a long night. As darkness fell, she found herself reflecting on the events of the day. Ethan Irving had killed a man to protect her freedom, a freedom he had already paid for with his life savings. The depth of his commitment to a woman he barely knew both puzzled and moved her. What kind of man risks everything for a stranger's liberty? She wondered. And why does my heart beat faster when he looks at me? The questions lingered, unanswered, as she kept her vigil through the night, watching over the sleeping man who had become, against all odds, her protector, her ally, and perhaps, though she scarcely dared acknowledge it, something more. Days turned to weeks as they continued their journey westward. Ethan's wound healed slowly but steadily under Rebecca's care, and they fell into a rhythm of travel and companionship that gradually erased the awkwardness between them. They crossed into New Mexico territory, where the landscape transformed from arid plains to majestic mountains and verdant valleys. Rebecca found herself changing as well. The pampered rancher's daughter was giving way to a woman who could ride from dawn till dusk without complaint, who could set up camp and cook over an open fire, who could spot water sources from a distance and identify edible plants. She was becoming the kind of woman who might truly thrive in the West. More surprising was the change in how she viewed Ethan. What had begun as cautious gratitude had evolved into deep respect, and now, though she tried to deny it, into something warmer and more dangerous. She caught herself watching him when he wasn't looking, admiring the strong line of his jaw, the way sunlight caught in his dark hair, the gentle way he handled his horse. One evening, as they made camp in a sheltered grove near the Rio Grande, Rebecca found herself studying Ethan as he skillfully prepared a rabbit he had caught for their dinner. His hands moved with practiced precision, nothing wasted in his movements. "You're staring, Miss Mitchell," he said without looking up, amusement coloring his voice. Rebecca felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I was just admiring your skill with that knife." He glanced up with a half-smile that made her heart skip. "Is that all you were admiring?" The directness of his question caught her off guard. Before she could formulate a response, he spoke again, his tone gentler. "I think, after all we've been through, you might call me Ethan." Rebecca swallowed. "Then you should call me Rebecca." "Rebecca," he repeated, as if testing the feel of her name on his tongue. The way he said it sent a pleasant shiver down her spine. That night, after they had eaten and the fire had burned low, Ethan produced a small, leather-bound book from his saddlebag. "I noticed you like to read," he said, offering her the volume. "Thought you might enjoy this." Rebecca accepted the book, surprised by the gesture. It was a collection of poetry by Walt Whitman. "Where did you get this?" "Trading post back in Las Cruces," he admitted. "While you were buying supplies, I saw it and thought of you." The simple kindness of the gift touched her deeply. "Thank you," she said softly. "No one's given me a book before." "Hard to believe," he replied. "You seem like a woman who appreciates words." "I do," she confirmed. "My mother taught me to read when I was young. It was our secret at first. My father thought education was wasted on girls." Ethan's expression darkened. "Your father and I disagree on many things." Rebecca opened the book, leafing through the pages. "Will you read some with me?" she asked impulsively. His eyebrows rose in surprise. "I'm not much for poetry. Please." She moved closer to him by the fire, holding the book where they could both see it in the flickering light. After a moment's hesitation, Ethan nodded. "Which one?" Rebecca found a poem and began to read aloud softly. I am not contained between my hat and boots." As she read Whitman's expansive lines about freedom and the open road, she was acutely aware of Ethan beside her, his shoulder occasionally brushing against hers. The words seemed to speak directly to their journey, to the vast landscapes they traversed together. When she finished, they sat in companionable silence, the only sounds the crackling fire and distant night birds. Finally, Ethan spoke. "He understands," he said simply. Rebecca nodded. "The yearning for freedom. Yes, he does." Another silence stretched between them, but this one felt charged with unspoken emotions. When Ethan finally turned to face her, his blue eyes reflected the firelight. "Rebecca," he began, his voice low, "I need to ask you something." Her heart quickened. "Yes, when we reach California." He hesitated, then continued. "Are you still planning to go your own way?" The question caught her by surprise, though she realized she had been considering the same thing herself. When they had begun this journey, independence had been her only goal. Now, the prospect of parting from Ethan filled her with a hollow ache. "I don't know," she admitted. "I haven't thought that far ahead lately." He nodded, as if her answer didn't surprise him. "Well, there's still time to decide. We're weeks away yet." But something in his tone suggested the question held more significance than he was letting on. Rebecca gathered her courage. "What about you, Ethan? Do you still want me to leave when we reach California?" His gaze held her steadily. "What I want and what's right for you might be different things." "That's not an answer," she pointed out. A half-smile touched his lips. "No, it's not." Before she could press him further, he rose to his feet. "We should get some sleep. Long day tomorrow." As Rebecca lay wrapped in her blanket that night, sleep eluded her. Ethan's question echoed in her mind. Was she still planning to go her own way? The woman who had left Marfa would have said yes without hesitation. But the woman she was becoming, the woman who had found strength she never knew she possessed, who had discovered what it meant to truly trust another person, that woman wasn't so certain. And then, there was the undeniable truth she could no longer ignore. She was falling in love with Ethan Irving. The realization should have terrified her. She had sworn to never let a man control her destiny again. Yet with Ethan, she felt not diminished but expanded, as if his presence in her life didn't confine her but instead opened new possibilities. Across the dying fire, she could make out Ethan's sleeping form, his chest rising and falling in the gentle rhythm of slumber. What did he want? He had asked about her plans but revealed nothing of his own desires. Did he see her only as a responsibility, a promise to be kept? Or did he feel this same pull, this same growing certainty that they were meant for more than temporary traveling companions? Rebecca closed her eyes, allowing the questions to fade as exhaustion finally claimed her. Tomorrow would bring another day of travel, another step closer to California, and perhaps closer to answers. The next weeks brought them through the rugged mountains of western New Mexico and into Arizona territory. The journey grew more challenging as they navigated difficult passes and crossed sun-scorched deserts, but it also cemented the bond between them. They worked as a team now, each anticipating the other's needs, communicating sometimes without words. One evening, as they made camp on a mesa, overlooking the vast expanse of the Arizona desert, Ethan surprised Rebecca by taking her hand as they watched the sunset paint the sky in spectacular hues of gold and crimson. "It's beautiful," she murmured, acutely aware of his calloused fingers entwined with hers. "Yes," he agreed, though when she glanced at him, she found him looking not at the sunset but at her. The intensity of his gaze made her breath catch. For a long moment neither spoke. Then, with gentle deliberation, Ethan leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was tentative at first, a question rather than a demand. Rebecca answered by moving closer, her free hand finding its way to his chest, feeling his heart pounding beneath her palm. The kiss deepened, becoming something hungry and honest, a culmination of weeks of growing affection and unspoken desire. When they finally broke apart, Ethan rested his forehead against hers, his breathing uneven. "I've been wanting to do that for a while," he admitted. Rebecca smiled, a happiness she had never known filling her chest. "What took you so long?" His expression grew serious. "I didn't want you to think. I didn't want you to feel obligated, because of what I paid for you." "Ethan," she said firmly, framing his face with her hands, "you never bought me. You bought my freedom. There's a world of difference." Relief softened his features. "I was afraid you'd think I expected something in return." "I know you better than that," she assured him. "You're a man of honor, Ethan Irving. I trust you more than I've ever trusted anyone." He kissed her again, more urgently this time, pulling her into the circle of his arms as the last light faded from the sky. When they separated, both breathless, Ethan's eyes held a question. "Rebecca," he began hesitantly, "I know this isn't the proper way of things, but nothing about our situation has been proper from the start." She waited, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I don't have much to offer," he continued. "Just a mining claim that may or may not pan out, and the promise that I'll work every day to make a good life for us. But if you'd consider staying with me when we reach California, not as an obligation, but as my wife, I'd count myself the luckiest man alive." Joy bloomed in Rebecca's chest, so intense it almost hurt. "Are you asking me to marry you, Ethan Irving?" A smile broke across his face, transforming it. "I suppose I am, Rebecca Mitchell. What do you say?" The question echoed the one he had asked her on that porch in Marfa, what seemed like a lifetime ago. "What do you want?" This time the answer came without hesitation. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I'll marry you." Ethan's smile widened, and he pulled her into another embrace, this one filled with the promise of a shared future. That night, as they lay beside the fire, speaking of dreams and plans for their life in California, Rebecca felt a certainty she had never known before. This was what freedom truly meant, not the absence of connections, but the ability to choose them for oneself. The next morning dawned clear and bright, a new beginning that matched their spirits. As they broke camp, Rebecca noticed Ethan seemed almost boyish in his happiness, whistling as he saddled the horses. "What's got you in such a good mood?" she teased, though she knew the answer. He pulled her into a quick embrace. "Just thinking about the future, Mrs. Irving to be." The name sent a thrill through her. "How long until we reach California? If the weather holds, another 10 days should see us to Sacramento," he replied. "We can be married as soon as we arrive if that suits you." "It suits me perfectly," Rebecca assured him. "Though I have nothing proper to wear for a wedding." Ethan shrugged, unconcerned. "We'll find something in Sacramento. There are shops there that would put even St. Louis to shame, or so I've heard." The image of herself in a new dress, standing beside Ethan as they exchanged vows, filled Rebecca with anticipation. After everything they had been through, the simple ceremony would be a testament to their journey together. They rode west with renewed purpose, pushing harder each day to cover ground. The terrain gradually changed as they approached the border of California, more green appearing among the rocky landscape, hints of the fertile land that awaited them. 5 days from Sacramento, as they made their way through a narrow mountain pass, disaster struck without warning. A sudden rockslide, triggered by loose shale on the steep slopes above, cascaded down toward them with terrifying speed. Ethan had only enough time to shout a warning before the avalanche of stone was upon them. Rebecca's horse reared in panic, throwing her from the saddle. She landed hard, the breath knocked from her lungs as rocks tumbled around her. Through the dust and chaos, she heard Ethan calling her name, his voice frantic. Then something struck her head, and the world went black. When Rebecca regained consciousness, she was lying on a blanket beneath a canopy of pine trees. Her head throbbed painfully, and when she tried to move, she discovered her right ankle was tightly bound and elevated on a rolled saddle blanket. "Ethan," she called weakly, struggling to sit up. He appeared instantly at her side, his face drawn with worry. "Thank God," he breathed, taking her hand. "You've been unconscious for hours. I was afraid." His voice trailed off, but the fear in his eyes told her how serious her condition had been. "What happened?" she asked, wincing at the pain in her head. "Rockslide," he explained. "Your horse bolted through you. You hit your head and twisted your ankle pretty badly. I carried you here away from the pass." Rebecca noticed for the first time that he was favoring his left arm, holding it close to his body. "You're hurt too." He dismissed her concern with a shake of his head. "Just bruised, nothing serious." But she could see from the tightness around his mouth that he was in more pain than he admitted. Typical Ethan, putting her welfare before his own. "Where are the horses?" she asked, looking around their makeshift camp. Ethan's expression grew somber. "Your mare didn't make it. Mine is tethered nearby. He's limping but should recover." The news of her horse's death saddened Rebecca, but she understood the practical implications as well. "One horse between us, and I can't walk on this ankle. We're still days from Sacramento." "We'll manage," Ethan assured her, though she detected uncertainty in his voice. "There's a settlement about 2 days' ride west of here. Once we reach it, we can get help, maybe purchase another horse." Rebecca nodded, then immediately regretted the movement as pain lanced through her head. "How will we travel with just one horse?" "I'll walk, you'll ride," he said simply. "We'll go slowly, rest often. Your ankle needs time to heal anyway." She started to protest, but the look in his eyes silenced her. This wasn't open for debate. The next 2 days were among the most difficult of their journey. Ethan fashioned a crude crutch for Rebecca so she could move around their camp, but traveling was another matter. True to his word, he walked beside the horse while she rode, setting a pace his injured arm and her battered body could tolerate. By the time they reached the settlement, little more than a cluster of buildings serving miners and travelers, both were exhausted. The local doctor, a gruff older man named Peterson, examined Rebecca's injuries with professional detachment. "Sprained ankle, not broken," he pronounced. "Head wound is superficial, but concussions can be tricky. You need rest, young lady, at least a week before you attempt further travel." Ethan nodded, his face haggard from the strain of the past days. "We'll take a room at the boarding house." "One room?" the doctor asked, raising a bushy eyebrow. "We're engaged to be married," Rebecca explained, too tired to care about propriety. Dr. Peterson grunted noncommittally. "Well, married or not, that ankle needs elevation and cold compresses. And you," he said, turning to Ethan, "need that arm properly bandaged. Bruised ribs, too, from the looks of it." Ethan submitted to examination with reluctance, confirming Rebecca's suspicion that his injuries were worse than he had admitted. The doctor bound his ribs tightly and fashioned a sling for his arm, which had suffered a minor fracture. "You're lucky," Peterson told them both. "That rockslide could have killed you." "Luck," thought Rebecca as they settled into their room at the boarding house later that evening. Was it luck that had brought her from the auction in her father's parlor to this remote settlement, injured but alive, with the man she loved beside her? Or was it something more, a series of choices made in defiance of fate? "Penny for your thoughts," Ethan said softly, sitting beside her on the narrow bed. Rebecca smiled up at him. "I was thinking about choices, and how one decision can change everything." He took her hand, his thumb tracing patterns on her palm. "Like my decision to come to Marfa Like your decision to ask what I wanted, she corrected. That was the moment everything changed. Ethan's blue eyes held hers. I'd make the same choice again, every time. So would I, she whispered, reaching up to touch his face. Every time. Their enforced rest in the settlement stretched from 1 week to 2 as both recovered from their injuries. They learned the place was called Minersville, a temporary name for a temporary town that existed primarily to serve the needs of prospectors heading into the Sierra Nevada mountains. It boasted a general store, the doctor's office, a saloon, the boarding house where they stayed, and little else. Yet even in this rudimentary place, Rebecca found moments of unexpected joy. The boarding house owner's wife, Mrs. Fletcher, took a liking to her and invited her to help in the kitchen once she could move about on her crutch. The activity kept Rebecca from going stir-crazy with inactivity, and Mrs. Fletcher's gossip about the comings and goings of miners and travelers provided welcome entertainment. Ethan, meanwhile, spent his days talking with prospectors, gathering information about conditions in the mining regions near Sacramento. In the evenings, he would share what he had learned with Rebecca as they sat on the small porch of the boarding house, watching the sunset. The claim Jacob left me is on the American River, he explained one evening. According to the men I've spoken with, it's good land not played out like some of the older claims. Rebecca leaned against his shoulder, enjoying the simple pleasure of being close to him. And there's a cabin, a small one, he confirmed. Nothing fancy but solid. Jacob built it to last. His arm tightened around her. It needs a woman's touch, though, she smiled, picturing their future home. Curtains, she decided. And a proper garden. Do you think we could grow vegetables there? The soil's good, Ethan assured her. You can grow anything you set your mind to, and children. She asked softly. Could we grow those too? His breath caught, and when she looked up, she saw such tenderness in his eyes that it made her heart ache with happiness. I hope so, he said, his voice thick with emotion. A whole garden of little Mitchells and Irvings. The image filled her with longing not just for children, but for the life they would build together, far from the constraints and prejudices that had marked both their pasts. By the time they were ready to resume their journey, they had managed to purchase another horse, an elderly but reliable gelding that the livery stable owner was willing to part with for a reasonable price. Rebecca's ankle had healed enough that she could ride without pain, though Dr. Peterson warned her against walking long distances for at least another week. The final leg of their journey took them through the foothills of the Sierra Nevada mountains, where the landscape transformed dramatically, pine forests giving way to majestic sequoias, rushing rivers cutting through steep canyons, vistas that took their breath away. It's like Eden, Rebecca marveled as they rode through a sun-dappled grove of ancient trees. Ethan smiled at her wonder. Wait until you see our land. The river there runs clear as crystal, and in spring the hillsides are covered with wildflowers. How much farther? She asked eagerly. We'll reach Sacramento tomorrow, he replied. From there, it's just a half-day's ride to the claim. That night, they made camp beside a small stream, their last before reaching civilization. After dinner, Ethan produced the Whitman book and handed it to Rebecca. Would you read something? He asked. For our last night on the trail, she opened the book, finding a passage she had marked days earlier. We were together, she read softly. I forget the rest. Ethan's eyes held hers over the fire. That's the whole poem, Rebecca nodded, just those 5 words. But they say everything, don't they? He moved to sit beside her, drawing her close. They do. They held each other in silence as darkness fell completely, the only sounds the crackling fire and the gentle murmur of the stream. Tomorrow would bring them to Sacramento, to marriage, to the beginning of their shared life. But tonight belonged to the journey that had brought them together, a journey that had begun with a transaction, but would end with a bond no money could measure. "Rebecca," Ethan said softly against her hair, "I want you to know something." She looked up at him questioningly. "When we reach Sacramento, before we go to the claim, I'm going to take you to the finest dress shop in town," he promised. "You deserve a proper wedding gown." Rebecca laughed softly. "I don't need finery, Ethan. All I need is you." "Nevertheless," he insisted, "you'll have it. I want to see you as a bride, not a traveler." The thought warmed her. "And you, will you have a new suit for the occasion?" he grimaced comically. "If it makes you happy, though I warn you I clean up decently, but I'll never be mistaken for a city gentleman." "Good," she said firmly. "I didn't fall in love with a city gentleman. I fell in love with a man who asks what I want and then moves heaven and earth to give it to me." Ethan's expression sobered. "And what do you want now, Rebecca Mitchell? Not just for tomorrow or for our wedding, but for our life together?" She considered the question carefully, knowing her answer mattered deeply to him. "I want what we've found on this journey," she said finally. "Partnership. Respect. The freedom to grow together, rather than one of us overshadowing the other." Relief and joy mingled in his eyes. "That's exactly what I want too." As they sealed their agreement with a kiss, Rebecca felt the last of her doubts dissolve. The path ahead might not be easy. Life in the gold country was demanding, and success was never guaranteed, but they would face it together, equals in all things that mattered. The next day, they rode into Sacramento, a city bustling with activity. After weeks on the trail, the sight of paved streets, substantial buildings, and crowds of people was almost overwhelming. Rebecca found herself drawing closer to Ethan as they navigated the busy thoroughfares, grateful for his steady presence. Their first stop was a respectable hotel, where Ethan secured separate rooms for them until the wedding. Next came the dress shop he had promised, where Rebecca was measured and fitted for a simple but elegant gown of ivory silk, a luxury beyond anything she had ever owned. "It will be ready in 2 days," the seamstress assured them. "Just in time for your wedding." 2 days. The reality of it sent a thrill of anticipation through Rebecca. In 2 days she would be Mrs. Ethan Irving, beginning a new life in a new land. Those 2 days passed in a whirlwind of preparations. They secured a marriage license, arranged for a minister, purchased a wedding band for Rebecca, and visited Ethan's banker to establish accounts that would give Rebecca access to their funds, a detail Ethan insisted upon. "If anything happens to me," he explained as they left the bank, "everything we have is yours. No questions, no complications." "Nothing is going to happen to you," Rebecca protested, disliking even the thought of it. Ethan squeezed her hand reassuringly. "Of course not. But a man likes to know his wife is provided for, just in case." Wife. The word still sent a flutter through her stomach every time she heard it. The morning of their wedding dawned clear and bright, as if nature itself approved of their union. Rebecca dressed with the help of the hotel maid, her hands trembling slightly as she fastened the tiny pearl buttons of her new gown. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman who gazed back at her, confident, radiant, a world away from the frightened girl who had stood in her father's parlor while men bid for her future. The ceremony took place in a small chapel near the hotel, with only the minister, his wife, and a few curious hotel staff as witnesses. When Ethan turned to see Rebecca walking toward him down the short aisle, the naked adoration in his eyes nearly brought her to tears. He too had made an effort with his appearance, a new suit of dark blue broadcloth, his hair neatly trimmed, his face cleanly shaven. But it was the love shining in his face that truly transformed him. The minister's words were traditional, but Rebecca felt their weight and meaning as never before. when he pronounced them husband and wife. Ethan's kiss held both tenderness and promise, the perfect beginning to their married life. They spent that night in the hotel, no longer in separate rooms but sharing a spacious suite Ethan had reserved as a wedding gift. Their coming together as husband and wife was both passionate and gentle, a culmination of the trust and love that had grown between them over the long weeks of their journey. The next morning, they set out for Ethan's claim, now their claim on the American River. The ride took them through rolling hills covered with golden grass, then into pine forests that provided welcome shade from the California sun. By late afternoon, they crested a rise, and Ethan reined in his horse. "There it is," he said, pointing to a valley below where a river gleamed like a silver ribbon. "Our home." Rebecca followed his gaze, taking in the small cabin nestled against a backdrop of tall pines, the cleared area that must be the mine entrance, the river flowing peaceful and inviting. "It's beautiful," she breathed. Ethan's arm slipped around her waist. "Welcome home, Mrs. Irving." They rode down into the valley as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. As they approached the cabin, Rebecca saw that it was indeed small but solidly built of squared logs with a stone chimney. A covered porch ran along the front, and someone Ethan, she realized, had placed 2 chairs there, as if anticipating evenings spent watching the sunset. Inside, the cabin consisted of one main room with a sleeping alcove partitioned off for privacy. A massive stone fireplace dominated one wall, and simple but sturdy furniture filled the space: a table with 4 chairs, a dresser, shelves for storage, and in the alcove, a bed covered with a colorful quilt. "Jacob made most of the furniture himself," Ethan explained as Rebecca explored their new home. "He was handy that way." Rebecca ran her hand over the smooth surface of the table. "He built a good home. We'll make it better," Ethan promised. "There's room to expand if we need to. And I thought maybe a garden out back, like you mentioned." The casual way he incorporated her wishes into his plans touched her deeply. This would truly be their home, created together. The first weeks of their marriage passed in a blur of activity as they settled into their new life. Ethan taught Rebecca about the basics of mining: how to pan for gold in the river, how to recognize promising ore, how to use the sluice box he had constructed to separate gold from gravel and sand. She proved an apt pupil, her quick mind grasping concepts that had taken him months to learn. When she wasn't helping at the mine, Rebecca turned her attention to making the cabin more comfortable. She sewed curtains from fabric purchased in Sacramento, planted the garden she had dreamed of, and arranged their simple possessions to create a welcoming space that reflected both their tastes. They fell into a rhythm of work and rest that suited them both. During the day, they worked side by side at the mine or divided tasks according to their strengths. Evenings were spent on the porch, watching the stars appear, or inside by the fire, reading aloud from their small but growing collection of books. And at night, they came together with increasing passion and intimacy, learning each other's bodies as thoroughly as they had learned each other's minds and hearts during their journey. 3 months after their arrival, their efforts at the mine began to pay off more substantially. A new vein of gold-bearing quartz, discovered when Ethan expanded the main tunnel, proved richer than anything Jacob had found during his years working the claim. "We could hire help," Ethan suggested one evening as they calculated their recent finds. "Bring in equipment to process more ore." Rebecca considered the idea. "Would that mean less time working ourselves?" Eventually, he confirmed. "Why? Do you want more time for other pursuits?" She smiled mysteriously. "Perhaps. In about 6 months I expect I'll have other responsibilities that will take priority over mining." Ethan looked puzzled for a moment, then understanding dawned in his eyes. "Rebecca," he breathed. "Are you saying we're going to have a baby?" she confirmed, her hand moving instinctively to her still flat stomach. "Dr. Wilson in town confirmed it yesterday when I went in for supplies." Joy transformed Ethan's face as he gathered her into his arms. "A baby," he repeated in wonder. "Our baby." As he held her close, Rebecca reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. From captivity to freedom, from isolation to love, from despair to boundless hope, all because one man had asked what she wanted and had the courage to help her claim it. "Are you happy?" Ethan asked softly, his hand joining hers over the place where their child grew. Rebecca smiled up at him, her heart full to bursting. "More than I ever dreamed possible." 6 months later, on a crisp spring morning, Rebecca gave birth to a healthy baby boy they named Jacob, in honor of the man who had set Ethan on the path to freedom, the path that had eventually led to Rebecca. As she held their son in her arms, Ethan seated beside her on their bed, she marveled at how completely her life had transformed in less than 2 years. "He has your eyes," Ethan observed, gently touching the infant's tiny hand. "And your stubborn chin," Rebecca replied with a tired smile. "Poor child." Ethan laughed softly, then grew serious. "I was thinking about your father today." Rebecca raised an eyebrow in surprise. "Why?" "Because in his greed he inadvertently gave me the greatest gift imaginable," Ethan explained. "If he hadn't tried to sell you, we never would have met." "Some good can come even from the worst intentions," Rebecca agreed. She looked down at their son, peacefully sleeping in her arms. "But we'll teach Jacob a better way. He'll know that people aren't property, that love isn't a transaction. He'll know freedom," Ethan promised, "and the responsibility that comes with it." In the years that followed, their family and their fortunes grew together. The mine continued to produce well, allowing them to expand the cabin into a comfortable home with room for their growing family. Jacob was joined by a sister, Sarah, 2 years later, and another brother, William, 2 years after that. They became respected members of the community that sprang up around the mining district. Ethan's fair dealing and Rebecca's natural warmth drew people to them, and their home became a gathering place for friends and travelers alike. On the 10th anniversary of their wedding, Ethan presented Rebecca with a special gift, the original bill of sale her father had signed, transferring ownership of her to Ethan. "I've kept this all these years," he explained as she unfolded the yellowed paper. "As a reminder." Rebecca stared at the document, feeling a complex mix of emotions. "A reminder of what?" "That freedom is precious," Ethan said. "That love is a choice we make every day, and that sometimes the most valuable things can't be bought at any price." Together, they fed the paper into the fire, watching as the flames consumed the record of that long-ago transaction. As the last corner curled and blackened, Ethan took Rebecca's hand. "What do you want now?" he asked, echoing the question that had changed both their lives a decade earlier. Rebecca looked around their home, at the children playing by the hearth, at the books lining the shelves, at the man who had seen her not as property but as a person worthy of choice, and her answer came as naturally as breathing. "This," she said simply. "Just this. Always." And in the years that stretched before them, through joys and sorrows, triumphs and challenges, that wish was granted, not by fate or fortune, but by the love they had forged from the most unlikely beginning. A love born when a cowboy with nothing but a promise in his heart asked a woman what she wanted, and then dedicated his life to helping her achieve it.